the U.S. veterans. And now I would like to invite Mr. Doug Livermore. He is a Special Forces veteran, Green Beret. He is colonel retired. And his topic is Ukraine's contributions to national resistant development and other countries facing aggression. So, Mr. Doug, please tell us about.
He's not retired though.
Really?
He's in the national.
I'm sorry.
He's a colonel.
Someday.
I said retired from the special forces.
No, he's not retired.
It's retired.
He's current.
Colonel of the National Guard.
No worries.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for this.
No worries.
Please
Someday
tell
I'll
me
retire.
about this more.
Just not anytime soon. Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having this event, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a few minutes of your time to speak. I don't want to belabor the point and talk through a bunch of things that we've already discussed, but I think it's important, again, echoing some of the things that have been said earlier in the day, just how important the contributions of Ukraine have been, not just in your own efforts to liberate your country and drive out the Russian invaders, but also the lessons that are being learned and used elsewhere around the world from your efforts. So to set a little bit of context, I do think that certainly nobody on this call has any illusions, but for the rest of the world, a lot of folks think that the war started in February of 2022, whereas in reality, we know that since 2014, with the Russian annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Donetsk and Luhansk, this is a conflict that's been going on for over 8, almost 9 years now. So all to say, that has provided ample opportunities for the rest of the world to watch as the Ukrainian forces, territorial defense forces, and others have gone through this process of rapid innovation, adaptation to really the best of the best of the Russians have been throwing at you. And there's ways in which that has then matriculated or trickled out to provide important lessons learned to countries around the world, which I'll talk about briefly. I do want to focus on a few areas where lessons learned from Ukraine are having an impact around the world, starting with civilian preparedness, the leveraging of technology, the importance of international partnerships, and innovative warfare tactics. So to begin with the civilian preparation and resilience, again, I know Mr. Nate Colvin spoke earlier about resilience and how NATO thinks through that, and a lot of like the Western countries look at resistance primarily. Whereas in reality, resilience is the whole of government, whole of society approach to hardening oneself against the sort of malign activities that we see from Russia. Ukraine has developed a comprehensive approach to civilian training, including the distribution of important guidelines for survival techniques and those resistance strategies. Again, this is something that since 2014, with the annexation of Crimea and the start of the war with the Russian invasion of Donetsk and Luhansk, there has been constant improvement in the amount of information that the Ukrainian government has been putting out. Efforts on the part of forces like the territorial defense forces to do preparatory activities paid dividends when we saw the full-scale overt invasion beginning in February 2022. And through watching the successes that the Ukrainians have had, that you have had since 2014, we are seeing a lot of those lessons incorporated into the defense strategies for other countries. Specifically, in the last 2 years since the full-fledged Russian invasion, we've seen the emergence of resilience and resistance campaign plans for Taiwan as they look at potential threats from the People's Republic of China. And then I know we have some other folks here on the call from our Baltic partners from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, in particular standing up their civilian preparedness, building out their continuity of government plans. And then from my own experience, I was just last week next door in Moldova, where, again, as a country that's dealing with Russian malign influence, there's a whole lot of interest and steps being taken there to try and harden the civilian population, build out that resilience, and oppose Russian aggression. Second, we were going to talk real briefly about the leveraging of technologies and intelligence. Obviously, anyone that's been following the war in Ukraine and your efforts has seen the massive explosion of the use of civilian drone technologies for reconnaissance, the integration of commercial off-the-shelf available imagery for intelligence, and the establishment of robust cyber defenses. In particular, what we've seen, again, on the Ukrainians, on your part throughout this campaign, in particular the overt invasion beginning in February of 2022, is the prevalence of smartphone applications, in particular to provide reporting on Russian activities, ground attacks, drone sightings, missile launches. And this has been a model that we've seen the initial steps of replicating elsewhere in some of these other areas around the world, in particular those who face the threat of authoritarian regimes. Obviously, we look at how significant that real-time data and intelligence has been in modern warfare. The innovative use of these technologies has leveled the playing field against a much stronger adversary in Russian Federation. Obviously, we look at the specific instances where other nations have started to invest in similar technologies, specifically drone warfare training programs and national cyber defense initiatives. All have been drawing lessons from Ukraine's approach in this war going back to 2014. Again, I could talk about Taiwan, Baltics, Moldova, again, where I have, through my National Guard service and the state partnership program, North Carolina has partnered with Moldova. We've been looking specifically at some of the cyber defenses and other resistance to Russian malign influence. The last example I would offer in this lesson as it relates to leveraging technologies in intelligence is the recent establishment of NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, which was in direct response to the Ukrainian lessons in its ongoing war against Russian aggression. Third, I want to talk briefly about international partnerships and support. Obviously, the Ukrainian people, you have sacrificed greatly, and any successes that have been enjoyed in the ultimate victory is yours alone. That said, the effort that Ukraine has taken in forging international alliances while emphasizing the strategic use of diplomacy and securing military aid and sanctions against the Russian aggressors has been critical to the successes to date. Obviously, there's been considerable military and financial aid. I am sorry to say that further U.S. aid right now is hung up in our Congress, but we are working diligently to try to shake that loose, as I know how desperately it is needed. In the interim, I know our European partners have stepped up significantly with the provision of artillery rounds, drones, and other aid that obviously we know cannot get there fast enough. Real briefly, when it comes to that international partnerships and support, we look at the role of international law and global institutions in legitimizing your defensive efforts. In particular, how this has influenced other countries to reassess their own diplomatic strategies and international commitments. We've seen the United Nations vote repeatedly against the Russian invasion, calling for the immediate withdrawal of Russian forces. The International Criminal Court has indicted Putin and some of his henchmen for the kidnapping of Ukrainian children. And these are all some of those like legal underpinnings that are further justification and allow any of those countries that might be on the fence about their support to Ukraine or their opposition to Russia to lean to the side of right. There are multiple case studies where we see other countries already strengthening their diplomatic engagements and military alliances, seeking to replicate Ukraine's success in building a broad-based international support. Obviously, in the last several months, we've seen Sweden and Finland, both countries that were long time held to their neutral stances, joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And then recent developments with the Australia, US, and UK alliance in the Pacific, looking to their support of Taiwan. So the lessons that have been learned from all of the hard work that Ukraine has done in building that broad coalition is having an influence on how the world, the free world, pushes back against authoritarian regimes elsewhere. Last point I wanted to talk about was decentralization and innovative warfare tactics, specifically looking at how Ukraine has adapted its military strategy to focus on mobility, flexibility, guerrilla tactics, and effectively using the terrain and urban environments to its advantage. Mike, I know, has been out to Hostomel. That is a perfect example of, in particular, Ukrainian Defense Forces, TDF in particular, adjusting on the fly to react to what was basically an attempted airborne envelopment by the Russians to soundly defeat the Russians there. Obviously, the defense of Kyiv and the role that TDF played in attriting and ultimately driving back the Russian invaders. Last year's liberation of Kharkiv, liberation of Kherson, and really in particular, when you look at some of the innovative tactics, great success that has been seen in defeating the Russian Black Sea fleet and driving it completely out of the Western Black Sea through use of advanced drones, both airborne and the unmanned surface vessels. Another form of that decentralization and innovation has been the formation of volunteer battalions, the integration of civilian with military expertise into the defense strategy, such as through the TDF, which has underscored the value of decentralized approaches to warfare. Obviously, in this case, the TDF is an incredible example of that. I have close relations through some of my nonprofit work with the International Legion, in which we've provided some aid and support to the International Legion, which fights, I know, alongside the Ukrainian forces. And then in particular, what we've seen is some of the successes with Ukrainian SAW operating alongside or directing partisan operations against the occupiers in some of the territories. So all that to say on this last point, these are lessons that the international community is learning, but the free world is looking at this and seeing how they can reevaluate their military doctrines to include more versatile and unconventional tactics, with training programs and strategic plans being updated to reflect these irregular warfare types of approach to their own defense. We've seen some revisions and discussions of Special Operations Command Europe's resistance operating concept, which again is a concept that I believe was largely tested and developed and has been used to good effect to help Ukraine, to help you since 2014. Our increased Baltic engagements, in particular, some of the territorial defense forces we've seen from the Baltic countries that have come to the U.S. for our Ridge Runner unconventional warfare exercises here in West Virginia, which I've had the privilege of participating in several of those. And then what we just see is this general hunger for and consumption of lessons learned from your experience, be it the drones, the unmanned surface vehicles, and as was already mentioned in one of the previous speakers, sort of the return to some of these more conventional forms of warfare, such as like artillery and the importance of that, something that we on the U.S. side had really not paid attention to for probably the last 20 years of the global war on terror. So in conclusion, the conflict in Ukraine has offered invaluable lessons in resilience, technological ingenuity, and international cooperation, and in adaptive tactics that are being consumed and implemented around the world. We do seek to emphasize the broader impact of these lessons on global defense strategies, which again, if you look at who all is listening in on this conversation, we have folks from around the world, to include many of our other partners who are facing Russian and other authoritarian regime aggression. As we look to highlight it towards a more dynamic, technologically enabled, and people-powered approaches to national security. So I just wanted to end by reinforcing this idea that through adversity, you have provided a blueprint for modern defense that resonates with countries around the world, potentially altering the landscape of international military strategy for many years to come. So as an American who is still in the defense community and having just recently deployed as, well, like I was saying, Moldova last week, I am incredibly grateful for all the sacrifices that the Ukrainian people are making, and in particular, as it relates to holding back Russian aggression and showing us how better to defend ourselves. So thank you very much, and that concludes my comments.
Thank you so much, Derek. And now I would like to ask a question to Mr. Doug Livermore. You were talking about Ukraine's contributions to the national resistance development in other countries. It's very important, and now we know that Ukraine really pays the highest value for the whole democratic world. So I would like to ask you such a question. If you have an opportunity to speak to the democratic countries, which message would you like to share with them to prevent other aggressions in future? So we know that Russia and, for example, Northern Korea, they're threatening all the world. So which message would you like to share with the democratic world to prevent this future aggression from them again? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'll caveat or put out the disclaimer initially that I can only speak for myself as a private American citizen. Certainly none of my comments represent the U.S. government or any of its departments and agencies. Now, all of that said, I've been a strong believer and supporter of Ukraine, going back all the way, as I was saying, with the invasion that started in 2014. I do think the important message to be taken away is that authoritarian regimes only respond to assertive opposition, in that were we to falter in our support to Ukraine or any of our other freedom-loving countries around the world, our partners and allies, then we would see these authoritarian regimes like Russia, like China, like Iran, etc., see that as a sign of weakness and only expand their aggression. As I mentioned in my previous comments, there are certainly some frustrations that I feel as it relates to the current impasse that we've had with additional U.S. military aid. I certainly can appreciate some of the opposition that thinks that they have some concerns on the past aid and future aid, but I always offer is a counter argument that the investment that the American people, the American taxpayers are making to support Ukraine is pennies on the dollar over what we would be potentially forced to pay, not just in dollars, but also in American blood and lives. To say nothing about our other NATO partners and allies who would also suffer more greatly were we to not provide that support. And I extrapolate or I expand that logic to, as I was saying, when we look at Taiwan, when we look at our support to our Middle Eastern partners, we look at all of our other NATO and other aligned partners in Europe, that is imperative that we collectively, the freedom-loving peoples and nations of the world, bind together, stand together, and share the burden that's required to make the world safe for liberty and for our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you.